Hello everybody, my name is Michael Kummer. I'm with Exciting, responsible for sales and marketing, and welcome to our webinar today about how to simplify role management and role administration in SAP with the exciting authorizations management suite, or XAMS. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items that I would like to address. First of all, this webinar is going to be recorded, so you will receive a link within 24 hours of this webinar. So by tomorrow at that time, you should have gotten an email from Citrix with a link to the recording. I'm also going to follow up with you guys and make sure you've received the link. If you have any questions during the webinar, there is a questions box or panel in your GoToWebinar control panel. So depending on what operating system you have, that is probably going to be on your right-hand side. It may be collapsed, so you can expand it, and there you should see a box to type in your question. I'm going to keep an eye on those questions, and I have two of my colleagues on the call with me as well, Alessandro and Jeff. They're also going to keep an eye on those questions and either already respond in writing, but we'll certainly, I'll certainly, read out those questions then during the webinar and try to answer them. I'm going to make a couple of breaks in between after important sections where we can address questions based on what I just covered, and then at the very end we're going to have about 15 minutes as well where we can address any questions that I may not have been able to cover during the webinar. Also, if you like to rather ask me your question instead of writing it, I can unmute you and you can raise your hand in the GoToWebinar control panel. That's for me an indication that you would like to speak, and I can unmute you and you can ask me your question. If that's easier, or if it's a complex or longer question, then that may be the preferred route. With that being said, I think we can get started. So hopefully everyone sees my screen. If not, well, tell me please. But today we're going to cover how we can simplify role management in SAP, and I'm going to show you a couple of techniques on how you can do that. Before we get into that, a few words about who we are and what we do, and then we're going to go into the challenges of role administration. I'm going to point out a few of those pain points and then show you how we can address those pain points and simplify and automate many of those manual and time-consuming and ultimately costly tasks that are involved in not only a full role redesign, but also in role analysis, role testing, etc. For those of you who've been on the webinar before, I just changed a couple of slides, updated the presentation, so there's going to be something new for both of us, since I haven't really had a chance to practice it, but I think we're going to be all right. So a few words about Exciting. We were founded in 2008 by SAP security experts and trainers. We are headquartered in Switzerland. We have about 51 employees with offices in Germany, Switzerland, England, and of course the US. Here in the US, we are based out of Tampa, Florida, and we also have a very close relationship with SAP Education. So many of our senior consultants are also trainers, and we deliver and create a lot of training classes for SAP. So if you go to training.sap.com and look for advanced SAP authorization, for instance, then that's one of our courses that we have developed and we deliver with and through SAP. So let's jump into the reasons for why you may want to do a role optimization or role redesign. And there are certainly a lot of different reasons, and they vary from customer to customer, of course, but an ERP upgrade could be one of those reasons. Or if you maybe decide to migrate to S/4HANA. S/4HANA has a very different data model than your, let's say, legacy ECC system. And so if you would like to migrate, you have to redesign your roles to make sure you take out any of those T codes that don't exist anymore on HANA, replace them with potentially new T codes, etc. Or you may have a very messy role structure, maybe based on 20 years of running SAP. And you want to simplify that. You want to make your life easier. There may be different legal requirements, or you may have SOD issues, and maybe want to slim down your roles and reduce the number of roles assigned to users. So there are many reasons why you would want to change what you currently have in terms of roles and authorizations. And when you decide to do a role redesign, then I would like to walk you through a couple of those pain points that most customers face when they decide to do a full-fledged role redesign. First of all, it's obviously a manual effort, mostly for role admins, but also for your business users. So from a role admin perspective, you may start with doing an SU25 update to get everything, all the new proposals in from SAP, basically optimize and update your SU24. So you have a good and solid proposals database. You may look at your trace data, for instance, ST03N data, to find out what users were doing in the system over the past maybe 3 months or 6 months, depending on how you have your SAP system configured and how far back you keep that the data. And I already saw one hand raised, but someone took it back down then, I guess. Maybe it was by accident. And so you look at the trace data, and you very often then create a spreadsheet with all your users and all the roles, and you try to connect them and make sense of how they go together, basically. And that's obviously a manual and cumbersome and unreliable process that usually results in a huge spreadsheet that you have to figure out. And you may take that spreadsheet to your users and say, hey, please tell me, what it is that you need, what roles do you need? But the business users don't necessarily know what roles they need. They just know what they need to do, what T-codes maybe they need to get their job done. So that input is not very reliable either, and so it becomes an unreliable spreadsheet basically at the end of the day, and an unreliable base that you use to build your roles. And then once you have your spreadsheet done and you think you're happy with what you have, you go back to PFCG and you start building those roles. Again, a manual effort, of course. You maintain your org fields. You may replicate roles if they are pretty much the same and only differ in org fields, etc. And then comes a very expensive portion or milestone of the project, and that is testing. Typical unit testing in your Q environment, where you create test scripts, run through them. You may again loop in your business to assist with testing, to verify test scripts, etc. And of course, testing in Q is never as reliable as what users actually do in production. So there's always that potential gap between what you have tested and what users actually do. But once you're done with your testing, you cross your fingers and you go live, and you hope nothing goes wrong, but more often than not, you end up in those war room scenarios where users call in during go live because they are stuck, missing authorizations, etc., and role admins in the background try to fix whatever needs to be fixed. So that's kind of the more or less the norm, if you will, but as you can probably tell, there are a number of opportunities for improving certain steps that we've discussed. And so it all starts with analyzing your existing roles to figure out where the issues really are, and instead of having to rely on users that report missing authorizations or whatever, you can be proactive. You can already analyze and understand where you have potential issues with your roles and what the impact on a role redesign may be, and what impact you might have. From a role admin perspective, there is another area of optimization where you can semi-automatically update your SU24, so you don't have to do that manually, and you don't necessarily have to rely on your SU25, because that's, we have seen in the past, not always complete. So it really helps to semi-automatically or even automatically scan your existing roles and update your SU24 from there, or scan your custom code, look for authorization checks and make sure they're properly proposed in SU24. And then you can, at least using the exciting authorizations management suite, virtually design your roles instead of going that spreadsheet route. So you can load in your trace data, your ST03N data from multiple months if you want to, and virtually design your roles. And that means there is then minimal impact on your business, because you don't have to take a spreadsheet to them and ask them to verify your role design. You can do all of that based on what users were doing without having to ask them. And then we can help you with automatically building those virtual roles in PFCG, so you don't have to do that manually. We can help you with mass replicating those roles and have different single roles that are identical, for the exception of those organizational fields, which may differ based on business unit, based on geographic location, etc. And then we can pretty much either reduce or in many cases eliminate the need for classic unit testing. So instead of testing in queue, we can shadow your users in production and simulate how new roles would work for users without having to assign those roles. And then once you go live, there is also the ability of having an automatic fallback, so that if you really forgot something and the user gets stuck, that user can automatically, or at least with your permission and workflow configuration around that, request the old roles back and continue working while someone else in the background fixes whatever needs to be fixed. So that's just a quick overview of where there are areas or opportunities to improve. And we're gonna step through every single one of them, and I'll show you how you do that and how it looks like from an admin perspective, and then in some cases from an end user perspective if there is end user involvement. So let me introduce to you the exciting Authorizations Management Suite, or XAMS. So whenever I say XAMS, that's what I mean.
Hey Michael, we have a hand raised.
Yes, I can see the hand. And I think let me skip through, well, let me do that. I'm gonna unmute you, Brenda, and you can ask your question if there is any. Looks like I cannot unmute you for whatever reason. Nope, I'm afraid, Brenda, you have to type in your question because I cannot unmute you, and that may be because you're using the web client. Okay. You took your hand down, so let's continue. And if you have a question, I'm sorry about the not being able to unmute, but just type it in and I can address it then. All right, so back to our presentation. I would like to show you what the XAMS can do to address every single one of those simplification or automation opportunities. And without going into too much detail about what the XAMS does and everything, just a quick overview. XAMS consists of a number of modules that you can use individually or in combination. So these are the 7 modules plus a number of free tools. So if you're interested in any of the free tools, and I'm going to give you a quick overview of what they do, and if you're interested, just shoot me an email and I'll send you a download link for those. So let's start with those free tools. One is the user logging tool. So usually as part of your regular maintenance window, you have to lock your users at some point and then unlock them once the maintenance window is over. And typically to do that, you have to sit in front of the computer and lock the users and then unlock them. And if that maintenance window is from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m., that means someone has to be in front of the computer at 11 p.m. and then again at 5 a.m. With the user logging tool, you can simply schedule that. So you can say lock everyone except these users at 11 p.m. and automatically unlock them at 5 a.m. so you can sleep instead of locking users. And the other one is the RFC stocktake tool, which gives you an overview of your RFC landscape, and that's very useful if you plan to do an RFC optimization project where you may want to deauthorize some of your RFC interfaces, which may be running as SAP all. With this free tool, you can analyze the landscape and get an idea of how many interfaces there are, what users they're associated with those interfaces, etc., to kind of gauge the effort involved in running such a project. So if you're interested in those, just shoot me an email. You see my contact information at the end, and I'll send you download links. Beyond that, there are 7 more modules that are not free that we use either individually or in combination for certain role maintenance, role analysis, role design topics, and I'll walk you through each single one with screenshots to show you what it can do and how it does it. And so let's start with the Role Profiler. Role Profiler is our analysis tool that can help you to just understand what it is that you're dealing with. Where are the issues, potential issues in your roles? It also helps you to automatically update your SU24, optimize your SU24 based on your existing roles. It can also tell you how compatible your roles are to S4HANA. So if you plan to migrate to S4HANA, you can run the report, and we tell you exactly how many obsolete objects you have in your roles, how many new objects you would need to make that role work on S4HANA, etc. And I'm going to show you that in a screenshot. But overall, there are about 90 reports that you can run, and here is an incomplete list of those 90 that gives you an idea of how good your existing role concept is. And so let's start with a very simple example, scanning your roles for open authorizations. So I've selected all my Z roles in this example. You don't see it up here, but there is a role selection button basically that's not on the screenshot, where you can select the roles that you would like to scan. And then you can run any of those reports. And in the first category, role quality and sustainability, we have the open authorizations. So after running this report, and it only takes a few seconds, you see a list of roles with their corresponding open fields or open org fields. And then you can double click maybe on the 99 here, and you see a list of all the 99 open fields that you have in that particular role. And not every finding, of course, may be an issue, but at least it gives you transparency over how many open fields you have, and then you can decide if that is indeed an issue that needs to be addressed, or if you can ignore it. And if you want to ignore it, you can what we call mitigate that particular finding, which basically hides it temporarily from the report. And some of the other reports here are set up in a very similar fashion. So you can look for manual authorizations. You can even look what an SU24 update may, how it may impact your existing roles. We can look for asterisk type of authorization access, etc., etc. Next example is something slightly different, but also interesting. If you just want to find out, okay, who has assigned what role? So give me a list of users and show me the roles that they have assigned. And that's what that report is basically for. So you get a list of users, and you can make a user selection as well, so it doesn't show all of them. If you have 50,000 users in the system, you may not want to display them all. And then here in the each of those columns here represents a role, and the green square indicates assignment. So this particular user has these roles here assigned, and you can export that to Excel and then do some further analysis to find out exactly who has what and why. Another example is the S4HANA migration I've mentioned before. So we have a report that tells you the impact on your roles on an S4HANA migration. So what we've basically done is we've taken SAP's simplification list, which is SAP's 400+ page document that describes the changes they've done in S4HANA that impact your roles and authorizations, or more generally speaking, the data model. And so we give you a list of roles and tell you how many objects are obsolete in those roles and how many objects you would have to introduce to make that role S4HANA compatible. And again, you can double click and you can see, okay, here we have a number of transactions, FD01, 2, 3, and 5, that are obsolete in S4HANA because they've been replaced with the business partner transaction, BP. And you can look at SU24 and update SU24. We give you a list of OSS notes that are relevant to this particular simplification. But basically, you just get a feeling of how much you have to change before you can go to S4HANA. And we can make those changes for you automatically as well. Not part of today's webinar, but just so you know, we can make that migration of your roles automatically for you. The next one is an example of analyzing your display role. So let's say you have a naming convention that says everything that starts with, or every role that starts with D underscore is a display role and shouldn't have any change activities in there. Well, very often your display roles have change activities. They may have, crept in over time, whatever the reason may be. We can tell you. So we have a list of roles again that we scanned, and we tell you how many non-display activities those roles have. And again, you can double click and you see the details, and that will help you to fix those roles and remove those non-display activities from your display roles, because obviously those are not display roles if they have non-display activities. Next one is a classic SU24 optimization example. So we can scan your roles and we look for table access. And if we find table access, we can make sure that table access is properly proposed in SU24, either through the table group, STabuDis, or through the table name, STabuNum. And so we can show you if the proposals are missing, and we allow you to automatically update your SU24 or put the change on the transport right from this report. And you can do that one by one, of course, or you can go into export mode, select all the findings, and do it in one shot. So that's what I meant before when I said semi-automatically or automatically optimizing your SU24. And there are a number of other SU24 update reports that you can run to really make sure you have a solid SU24 before you get into any role redesign project. So that was the role profiler. That was the analysis part. And I'm going to check real quick if there are any questions at this point. I don't see any questions. Okay, so we'll move on to the next section, dealing with scanning your custom ABAP code. And we look at it both from a development as well as from a security perspective. And from a, we're going to cover mostly the security aspect, but just a few words about the ABAP Alchemist as a development tool. So what it does is it scans your code, your custom ABAP code, and it detects vulnerabilities. In addition to that, we have what we call an API finder. So let's say you're a developer and you would like to write code that updates a table. Let's say you want to update table USR02. And you could certainly write your own code to update that table, but chances are SAP has a function module or a BAPI that does that. And obviously the function module was already tested by SAP. You don't have to worry about that piece of code that you get from SAP for the most part. So instead of writing that code yourself, it makes much more sense to repurpose standard functionality. But how can you find out if there is already a function module that deals with USR02? Well, that's where our API finder comes in. All you have to do is you type in the table name, for example, and we give you a list of function modules and BAPIs that deal with that particular table or whatever it may be. So it really helps you to find and repurpose standard code instead of writing it yourself. But more from a security perspective, we allow you to scan a number of different object types, and you can see here a list of supported types that we can scan. So it could be a role, package, transaction, class, whatever it may be. Then you can select your finding patterns, and again, most of those are meant for developers to scan for, I don't know, OpenSQL patterns or critical ABAP keywords. But from a security perspective, we can scan for and find missing authorization checks. So authorization checks that you should be doing in your code, but you don't. And we can not only find those cases, we can also propose the authorization checks that you should be doing. We can also obviously scan existing authorization checks and find them and make sure they're proposed in SU24. So we have the authority check statement, the authority checks in HR ABAP, and the called transaction authority check that are relevant from a security perspective. Now, whenever your code has an include or jumps off to another program, we can follow that call stack up to a certain level that you can define here. 5 is the default, but you can certainly change that to whatever depth that you would like to scan. Of course, the deeper we go, the longer the scan takes. And then once you execute that scan, We present you the findings based on priority. So green is informational, you can probably ignore that. Yellow is something you should look at, and red would be something you definitely want to look at. Now, one thing that I forgot to mention before and with the role profiler is that all of those, not all, but most of the reports and most of the scan patterns here, you can make part of your transport mechanism. So whenever you execute or try to release a transport, we can scan your code, we can scan roles if that's what you're transporting, and make sure there are no issues before that transport gets released. And if you are security person, then you may not want to look at it from a basic view perspective or a call stack perspective. You may be interested in looking at it from an authority checks perspective, and especially authority checks including SU24, where we tell you again, if those authority checks that you're doing in your custom code, if they are proposed in SU24, and if not, you can make that update right from here. So that again is a tool that we use very often during SU24 optimization projects that that we do before we do the actual or execute the actual role redesign. Next one is what we call the role designer, and that's really meant to replace that spreadsheet that I've mentioned initially, where you have all your users and all the roles and you try to connect them and make sense. So with the role designer, you have the ability to virtually create roles, and the tool relies on ST03N data. So we can import that from the local system that we are installed on, or you can get it from somewhere else and then import it here. But the bottom line is, once you have imported your trace data, what you get is a list of transactions on your left that are part of the trace, a list of users on your right, again, that are part of the trace. With the transactions, you see in how many roles you have those transactions and how many users executed those transactions. So you can again see, if you have popular transactions that everyone is executing, you can see that from right here. On the user side, you can see how many transactions a user has used and how many they are still unauthorized for based on that role assignment that we'll do here in a couple of slides. And here in the middle, we have our role creation wizard, basically. Everything that we do in here is virtual in our own table space, meaning nothing of what we do here affects the system up until to the point where we say, okay, now generate my roles that I created here in PFCG. So here in the middle, I have a couple of options in terms of creating roles. I can, one thing that I would like to mention again, if you look on the left-hand side where you see the list of transactions, you can group those up here with the group by button, and you can group them by user or by component maybe. So depending on if you wanna, how you want to start designing your new roles, you can use different groupings to slice and dice the view so it makes most sense for you. And then what you can do is you can just double click here on create role and say, okay, I want to create a role for a finance manager, let's say. And then you just drag and drop the FI component, let's say over here to the finance manager, and all the transactions it contains are automatically added to that role virtually. Again, nothing of that exists in the system. And then, or alternatively, you can also apply function templates. So let's say you want to create a basis role, but you don't know exactly where to start and how to start. So you just say apply function template. You select a template maybe for a basis administrator access, and we automatically add those transactions into that role. Or you can say, you know what, I just drag and drop roles over, and in this case I created an exciting admin role that contains all the transactions that you need to execute or run our own software, and then you can drag and drop those roles over to a user. So that virtually assigns a role to a user, and what you can immediately see is how well that user would be covered based on the trace data. So based on those 25 transactions that M. Kummer executed as part of the ST03N data, by assigning that role, and it looks like I mostly executed exciting transactions, I have now 100% coverage with that role assignment. So I would be completely covered to work in SAP based on what I did over the past couple of months. In this case, I think I have trace data that dates back to November of last year. Okay, and then so the before what we saw was the designer. Now we go into the reports view to do some further analysis. So here again, I can pull up my list user status, and I can see that I used 25 transactions. I have one virtual role assigned, and I have a surplus of 16 transactions based on that one role assignment. So ideally, I don't want to over-authorize users. So I can do a number of things. I can say, find me a better fitting role for that user that provides the same coverage, but has less of a surplus. You can optimize your roles and include parameter transactions if you don't have them in your trace data. Or you can say, you know what, carve out those 25 T codes that the user used and put them into a smaller role so I can get rid of that 16 transaction surplus. So there are a number of things that you can do from here to really fine-tune your virtual role design because nothing of that exists in the system yet. And then you can do a number of other things. You can scan, for instance, either a user or those roles for critical functions, either using GRC. If you have access control, we can reach out to access control, or you can do it using our built-in engine. So we also have an SOD engine built into the XAMS if you don't have access control. You can also then go ahead and say, you know what, I'm happy with my role design that I've done here. Generate either one or multiple roles in PFCG. So you don't have to do that manually, you just push a button and we generate those roles for you. And then you can go back to PFCG, do your SU24 update, and basically finalize and complete your roles. And so that was the role designer. That's really meant, again, to replace the spreadsheet and help you build roles based on what users were doing and prevent over-authorized users, basically. The next step is to replicate roles. So let's say I only built a number of template roles because I know that I have several business units, for instance, that all have the same role assignments, but their org fields differ, right? So I can use the role replicator for that. And what you can do is you can model your organization in here, again, virtually. You can import it from your org structure from SAP, of course. You can model it manually by drag and drop. In my example here, I've created an org set called Asia, and then a number of Asian countries underneath, and each Asian country has a number of org fields with the values. And these fields and values obviously may differ between all those different org fields. But once I'm done with my org structure setup, I can assign a template role to one of these org sets and say, replicate that role for me across all the other org sets here in my org set group. So the result is, in this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 single roles in PFCG that are identical from a transaction authorization object perspective, but that differ in org fields based on my setup here. And you can also use derived roles in here. You can assign a derived role here and replicate that. If you want to use both derived roles for making your authorization object maintenance a little easier and the role replicator to extend that capability to organizational fields, basically. And once you have done your replication, you can always compare to make sure that nobody made any manual changes in PFCG to any of those org fields. And so you can use the compare button and you can see the status here already, and the yellow triangle or the red indicate that there is a discrepancy between what you have defined in your model and what you have in the system in PFCG. So you can compare and you see immediately how your org set differs from these two replicated roles. And then you can just click on the synchronize button here and overwrite those changes, or more specifically, put those changes on a transport. So you do all of your org field maintenance basically in here in role replicator. And so if you have to add a company code to a number of roles, for instance, you do it once in here to the org set and click on synchronize, and we synchronize that change down to all the affected roles. So you don't have to go role by role and update those org fields, even if you do it in the org field level. Next one is testing. So we've analyzed our roles, we have redesigned them, we have replicated them as we needed, and now it's time for testing. And so we use the role builder, and the name may be a little bit confusing because it's based on historic capabilities, but the role builder basically does one thing. It allows you to create new roles. We've done it already. And then instead of assigning those new roles to a user, which would immediately impact the user, of course, what we can do is we can assign those new roles to a reference user and assign the reference user to the dialog user without taking anything away of what the dialog user has. And so that allows you, because we don't impact that user, to run this in production. And we call it productive test simulation because it really simulates how new roles would affect a user. So the way it works is whenever the SAP kernel performs an authorization check, it does it against the reference user first, and if that fails, it does it against the dialog user. And if that passes, that means the user is not impacted because the authority check passed or succeeded. It only failed against the reference user, which is an indication that the new roles that we have assigned to the reference user are lacking certain authorizations that the old roles that are assigned to the dialog user have. And so ultimately that results in a return code 0 on the back end that we can scoop up and look at. So we see a list of all the return codes, and the ones again that we are focused on are return code 0s, because those mean there is something missing in those new roles that we have assigned to the reference user that is in the old roles. And it could be because of one of two reasons. A, we forgot something in those new roles and we need to fix it. So let's go back to dev, fix those roles, transport those changes up, and the return code would, or the return codes would go away. Or B, it's something we intentionally took away because we wanted to deauthorize the user. And if that's the case, then we can ignore that finding and we can hide it. But after a certain shadowing period, let's say maybe after 3 months or so, and we don't see any more return codes, we know that we have perfect roles and it's time to go live. And when we do, we use exciting times and what we call the protected go live, because there we can minimize the risk. And the way it works is similar to what I've shown you before, but with different role assignments. So now the dialog user has the new roles because those are the ones we are going live with, and the reference user has the old roles, but we have detached the reference user from the dialog user, but we keep it there so it can be assigned on demand, and that assignment can be triggered with, of course, rules and configuration that you can do on the back end, but it can be assigned by the dialog user. So if I'm a dialog user and let's say I'm a basis guy, I used to have SE16, I should have SE16, I don't have it anymore because someone forgot to give it to me, and I'm in the middle of go live, I need to update USR02, and I get stuck. Authority check failed. So I can go into a self-service transaction and say, hey, give me my reference user, which comes with my old roles, so I can do whatever I need to do. And you can, of course, build a workflow around that. So someone has to pre-approve that assignment or someone post-approves it. So the user can immediately continue working. And then at the end of the session, someone approves it, basically. You can also limit how long that assignment can take place on the back end. The user can further limit it in here. And that's really, helps to significantly reduce or remove the risk during go live, because no user can get stuck, because the user can always request the old roles back for an hour, for a day, however you want to set it up. And last but not least, once you have done your redesign and you're super happy with what you built and you want to keep it that way, we have a module we call a security architect that can help you to continuously audit your systems to make sure they are in compliance with best practice, with the SAP security guidelines, and also with checks that and tests that EY and PwC do when they come in and do a security audit. So we've worked with them in Europe together, and we've basically dumped their brain and taken all of the tests and checks that they do during an audit, and we put them into software. And so what we deliver is ready-to-use security concepts for ABAP, for NetWeaver Java, for GRC or access control to be more specific, for HCM, IDM, Solution Manager, SAP Single Sign-On, and HANA as the database. So those concepts describe how the component, the application, the system are supposed to be set up and configured, how you should do your roles, etc. And so it's a written concept basically that you can easily modify, because we use a very simple HTML-like markup language to write those concepts, so you can change them. Different colors, different chapters. You can rearrange chapters of the concept. You can hide certain chapters if they are not applicable to you. You can upload your own chapters. But it's basically like a huge PDF that you can generate as a PDF and export and save as a PDF to keep as reference. You can reach out to RFC connected systems, so you can install this on a solution manager if you want to, and it would show automatically here all the connected systems you can reach out to and test. And then every chapter of the document has a number of built-in checks that you can again select or deselect that test certain areas of the application or the system. And when you run a check, we can display the results in line with the document, so to give you some context of what the test is all about. Or we can present it as a table view. We can also save every check, so you can later go back and compare previous test results. But when you run or show the results in line, it looks something like this, and this is a very basic example of password settings in your instance profile, let's say, where you say, okay, the minimum password length, how many letters, etc. This is what you have in the system. This is what we have in the document or in the concept, what we expect to find. And here, obviously, you failed because this parameter is set to 1 in the system. We expect 3 or greater or equal than 3. You are not, so that's why you failed, hence the red traffic light, or the green one where you passed. Or if you look at it from a table perspective, system security and system settings, let's drill down here into the password settings that we've seen before. The overall check failed, and here are again the details where you failed and where you passed the tests basically. So you can use this to prepare for an audit maybe, or just to do it on a continuous basis after you've done your redesign, to make sure that your whole system, including your roles and authorizations, naming convention, etc., are properly set up and configured. From a technical perspective, in case you wonder, it's an ABAP-based solution. It has the ability to reach out to certain non-ABAP systems, but it's very much focused on transactional systems and ABAP. So it's a very easy install via transport, very easy uninstall. We live in our own name and table space, so we don't touch any of the standard SAP stuff, code for the most part, so it's relatively low risk to install. There is an OSS note out there if you're interested, where SAP also recommends using the XAMS specifically for RFC optimization projects, and SAP Consulting is in fact using the software as well. And with that being said, I'm going to open it up to questions. So if you have any questions, you can now either raise your hand or type it in. And while we wait for questions to come in, here is my contact information in case you want to either request download links for those free tools I've mentioned initially, or if you have any follow-up questions that you can think of right now, you can certainly just shoot me an email. And let's give it a minute or so more for any questions, but if not, then that's probably an indication that I explained myself very well and everything is crystal clear, which is certainly always nice to hear. Okay, well, apparently there are no questions. That's okay. I'm going to conclude the session, and with that, give you about 15 minutes back of your day. I'm going to send out an email shortly also with the recording, so you can just replay it if you want to. And then if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly. If there is something technical that I cannot answer, I'll be sure to loop in Jeff and Alessandro to get their technical input. And with that being said, thank you very much. I appreciate that you spent 45 minutes here with me today, and have a good remaining and rest of your day. Bye-bye.